Hi there, everyone who's here today. Thank you so much for joining me at Essential Vegan Desserts live event. We've got a special one today with a special guest, Chef Amy Levin, who is in the UK, in London, actually, and will be joining me shortly on a split screen. But before I get to Amy, and it's really a thrill to have her here today, and I'm very excited to welcome all of you. Thank you for coming. I want to tell you, if you don't know, if you're new to our live events at Ruby, that there is a question box on the right-hand side of the page. It says, ask question here. You can type it in and hit add, and we will do our best to get to your question and give you an answer. I may ask a follow-up to your question if I don't quite understand it, or if I think it's more of a conversation. I want to especially welcome my new Essential Vegan Dessert students. I would like to remind you all, if you haven't already joined the private Facebook group, please do that. It's a great place to interact with one another, ask questions. Oh, I'm looking for a new stand mixer. What do you recommend? Show some photos, things like that. If you have questions of a technical nature, write to support@ruby.com, and someone from our great Ruby team will get back to you and help you out. You can always write to me at fran@ruby.com. In fact, anyone who's here, if you have a question or a comment or looking for some further information, you can write to me at fran@ruby.com. That's for sure. Remember, students who are in the course, that there is a question and a question area on the dashboard. If you have a question about an assignment or a unit or anything like that, that's a good place to ask your question. Also, check when you get to a unit. You can definitely ask your question for me there, and I will answer it. So let's see now. I want to introduce Amy Levin, our special guest, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about Amy if you don't already know about her. We do have an event doc attached to this event, and Amy was kind enough to give us one of her recipes and a link to her website. I recently took one of Amy's live stream classes on chocolate tempering. I feel like one of the best things about being a culinary professional is that there is always something more to learn and to practice, and I just really enjoyed taking Amy's class. So you can look into that. And here we go again. Last month, I remember glasses on, glasses off. I think it's time to visit the optometrist. Amy Levin is a classically trained professional chef who found her way into veggie and vegan cooking in around 2004. Amy can correct me if I'm wrong. During training to be a holistic health counselor at the Institute of Integrative Nutrition, IIN. After working for several of UK's most respected raw restaurants, Amy, and food companies, chocolate companies as well, Amy was able to apply that experience and knowledge to her role as senior sous and pastry chef at the world-renowned executive chef, two world-renowned executive chefs, Chad Sarno. Many of you, especially our Ruby people, know Chad, and the co-founder of Wicked Healthy. And Chad was involved in the professional chef's training, plant-based pro at Ruby. Amy worked with Chad at the restaurant in London and Munich during their opening years. I actually had the opportunity to dine at SAF, and it was wonderful. Sadly, I didn't get to meet Amy, but I hope to someday. With over 20 years of experience as a professional chef and a decade specializing in healthy chocolate desserts, Amy leads the way when it comes to empowering people with the tools needed to forge their own path within this very exciting sector. Amy has been teaching her signature chocolate and dessert classes, both live and online, since the pandemic, primarily online, if not completely online. And I really do recommend them. Her skills as a teacher are really wonderful. So I want to say thank you so much, Amy, for being here today. I appreciate it. I know that it's the evening for you and it's the afternoon for me. So while we haven't met in person yet, because of the Chad connection, I almost feel as if I know you, and I appreciate it. Remember to check out Amy's link. Now, for students in Essential Vegan Desserts, there is a link in our raw unit right to Amy. So, Amy, I have a couple questions for you, okay? Were you interested in vegan or vegetarian cuisine before IIN?
Yes, I actually got interested in it when 2000, I think it was like one. I was working at a place called the Option Institute in Massachusetts, which specializes in, there's two parts. One is a personal development center, and the other part, which is what started first, was a program called the Sunrise Program, which is working with children with autism. And they found that the children benefited best from a diet that was largely vegetarian at the time and whole food based. So that's where I got into vegetarian kind of by default, just because I was there and working with it. Yeah, so that's where I first got into it.
So what led you to specialize then in desserts? I mean, I know what led me to. It wasn't something that when I went to culinary school, I just was interested in food and cuisine, but the desserts were calling to me. What was that for you?
I remember actually. It was a weird thing. I think I've been asked this question mostly specifically about chocolate, so I'm trying to think about the whole dessert angle. But after I went to IIN, I came back to England, and I was living in Brighton at the time. And I really wanted to be a raw chef, but at the time, this was in like 2004 or 5, when it wasn't really a thing. And there weren't many businesses that offered an opportunity to work in that kind of environment. And there was a place that opened called the Food Clinic. And I was flipping through a paper that was like, job section. And I just flipped to a page and it said raw food chef. And I was like, wow, okay, that's amazing. Like, it's the only one that would come up. So I went there and I knew nothing about raw food. I had obviously my chefing background since I was 16. I was a chef. So I had my chefing background, and I just went in and just taught myself through books and started learning and started doing some desserts. And that was kind of where it started. I wouldn't say I was super passionate about it, but I felt like everyone that I worked for was like pushing me towards that. So like the owner of the cafe decided, we're not going to do the savory stuff anymore. We're going to turn into a tea and cake shop, which ultimately closed the cafe. But then I had to really learn all of this chocolate and desserts kind of stuff. And then, ultimately, Chad was, I had obviously different experiences after that cafe. I went on to work for another raw food business. She made raw chocolate, but it wasn't very good. However, I was very drawn to it. I remember walking past the room where they made the chocolate and just kind of in a cartoon where there's like that where the dog's going along and then all of a sudden it follows a scent. It was kind of like that. And it wasn't really the smell. It was more like there was something about it that seemed really magical, and I didn't know what it was. And I just was really drawn to it. And I started working with it the way that she worked with it, which was not very good. And then I started working with a guy named Linus Gorp, who owns a company called the Raw Chocolate Company here in the UK. And he started the first commercial chocolate company. And that's where I learned how to make chocolate properly in like a melanger, a stone grinder, whatever you want to call it, and tempering. And he opened a big factory, and so like that. And then I think Chad just was like, "You're the chocolate person," and so he took me as like, "You're the chocolate person, and you're going to be the sweet person." And he just sort of like assigned it to me. And I say this to a lot of people. Chad has this way of seeing something in a person that they don't necessarily see and then drawing it out in them, which is exactly what he did with me at staff. And then it turned out I was really good at it. That's the long answer.
Yeah. Well, I'll say you're really good at it, and you keep growing. I really relate to what you're saying about, back then, because for me, it's a lot back then. When I left the traditional world was over 25 years ago to see what I could do. And, because I became vegan for health reasons, really, at first, there was so little available in terms, not only ingredients, but in terms of knowledge. We really had to dig in and learn until there was somebody better, to just keep going. But raw really was not something that was talked about very much, or what I agree, what I found both in conventional non-raw vegan desserts and raw vegan desserts was, they were not good.
Totally.
So there was certainly room to improve, and it takes learning, it takes doing. I try to talk to my students, and I imagine you too, about chocolate is, it's universally beloved, and it's so possible to make these exquisite desserts, but you need patience, right? You need some patience. You need to treat the chocolate right. That's what I think. And do you have a stance on the ethics in chocolate, the ethical questions in chocolate in terms of fair trade, slavery?
Yeah, definitely, 100%. I definitely have a position on it. Yeah, yeah, it's something that I do talk with my students about, not heavily, but when we start talking about, people ask me where to get products, where to get ingredients. I always stress the importance of making sure that you're getting it from a really, like, an actually ethical sourced provider, because the stuff that is labeled fairly traded isn't necessarily fairly traded, particularly in places like Mexico and Africa, where the governments are very corrupt and they just use it to take money. And like you said about the slave chocolate, Africa's a big slave chocolate area. They traffic children. They take them from their parents, and they just slave them onto farms. So it's really important that when you're sourcing your cocoa products, if you're going to make chocolate, or if you're going to buy it just to eat it, even if you're just going to have a bar, that you're looking to source the very best chocolate. And so my definition of what the best is where it's truly ethically traded. If you're not making it yourself, that it's truly ethically traded, and that the ingredients you are making it yourself are also. And over here, I have a supplier called Tree Harvest that I use for everything, and and I always recommend them to my students because they have relationships with the farmers. They go and they visit, maybe not now, but like they used to. They have very long-standing, established relationships with the farms. So that it's actually fairly traded. It's not certified fair trade, but that doesn't actually matter because it's the certification, which is the corrupt system. But what's really fairly traded is getting in touch with the person you're going to buy it from, and just having a conversation about, do they know the people, have they visited the farm, etc.
100%. I mean, we really need to educate ourselves as consumers and we need to look at labels and look past the labels. I'm pretty heartened by some of what I'm seeing going on with some of the larger chocolate companies here. I've done some work with an international company called Puritos, and they have created Cacao Trace, they're calling it. And it's the farmers. It's the farmers. So if a chocolate isn't labeled with that fair trade certification, that doesn't mean it's not fair trade. Yeah. You get to know and vote with your fork and get to know who you're buying from. It's critical. I mean, it's just an accident of birth as far as I'm concerned, that we're here. My grandchildren aren't in the jungle, slave making chocolate. And we can, money talks, and hopefully, and that's it. So we agree 100% on that. And I know there's something else we agree on that I'm going to ask you about later. Have you seen a perception of a difference around vegan desserts since you started in 2004 in terms of acceptance or curiosity?
Oh, yeah, for sure. And I would say that in the last, I guess it's been maybe like 3 years since Derek started Wicked Healthy over here. It's grown exponentially. The interest in it and the popularity of it and the acceptance of it, and like I have neighbors. My neighbors go to Tesco, which is it's a big supermarket over here, and it's Derek is the executive plant-based chef for Tesco. So he brought out a line of product, so like sweet and savory. I think it's a crazy amount. It's over 50 products that he put together. They're both workhorses. And they went over and they got this like chocolate orange slice, and they were like, "Oh, we went to Tesco and we got the Wicked this," and I'm like, "I know him."
I know. It's amazing. The last time I was in London, and I can't remember when it was years ago, but I think I was there for a food show, a vegan expo. And I saw Derek's in the subway. I mean, the underground.
Yeah,
like a big picture.
Billboard.
Wow, I'm like, I know him. Those are my boys. It's great. I saw Chad not too long ago at Natural Products Expo here. I'm really proud of what they're doing. But like you, I just find, so 25 or so years ago, when I first cracked the code to make something that was delicious. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, there's no point to putting out a dish, or in this case, we're talking about desserts, a dessert that's like, it's good for what it is. Like, it's either going to be great or I don't want it. But I was excited, and I would say, "Oh, you're not going to believe what's not in this. That doesn't work." But now, instead of trying to cajole people, please try this vegan dessert. I don't even necessarily say it's vegan unless I'm with vegans, but they are like, "You're not vegan anymore? That's delicious." Well, that's the way it should be. And that's the way it can be. And we need people to learn. That's why what you're doing is really important. I'm very proud of my course because it's a really deep dive into, we can't throw out foundational technique because we're not using animal products. We're doing desserts. It takes paying attention to do something that's really absolutely wonderful. So, people ask me all the time, "What's your favorite dessert?" And that's a question that I'm like, really? What's my favorite dessert? I have a couple of favorites. Do you have like a top? Actually, I'm not going to ask you. How about we look at some? It's just, I know, it's like, well, who is my favorite friend, or which of my grandchildren is my favorite kid?
I get that question a lot also, and I never know how to answer. How do you answer?
I mean, what am I in the mood for today? What did I just figure out how to do? Or something like that. But let's look at some of your desserts. We have, thank you for sending them. They're just so beautiful. So can you see that? What is that, Amy?
That is a fermented cherry tart with a chocolate mousse on top.
God,
so
gorgeous.
The crust is a chocolate crust that's made in the dehydrator. And then we ferment cashews using cherry, so cherry jam. So it's a really potent cherry flavor in that fermented cashew cream. And the difference between soaking cashews and blending them up and making something and fermenting them is a world of difference. So students that come on the course are just like, that's not even remotely the same. Like, it's so much better. And then the chocolate mousse on top was a revelation. That's one of my favorite things right now. I do go through phases of what's my favorite thing. That's one of my favorite things. Yeah. It's just so beautiful, light, airy, amazing.
Beautiful.
And then this is a chocolate hazelnut layer cake. So it's a chocolate cake. Again, that's made in the dehydrator. So it's kind of like, for a raw dessert, it's very light and spongy. A lot of people try it and they're just floored by it. It was one of my most popular cakes that I did in my live classes. People loved it. And then that's a fermented coffee cream. So we layer fermented coffee cream and then we glaze it with that. And then just some like hazelnuts on the outside.
That is, those flavors for me are just, yeah.
Yeah, same actually. And then this is a chocolate peanut truffle. This is the free recipe that they have. So this is a really, really easy recipe, especially if you're not used to working with chocolate. It's kind of a foolproof, super easy truffle recipe. It's my waterless ganache recipe. And that's the way I teach, is with base recipes, so that you can use them across the board in many different applications. So you're not needing to, reinvent the wheel every time you want to do something. You just like, oh, I'll grab that element, put it together.
Mm-hmm.
So for this one, it's a waterless ganache with a peanut in the center, and then it's covered in a tempered chocolate, which I teach a few different ways, as you know, how to temper. And then just rolled in chopped peanuts.
Beautiful and delicious. Oh, that looks like art.
Yeah, I loved it. I love making bonbons. One of my favorite things. So this is a chocolate peppermint bonbon. So the colors on the outside are naturally colored cocoa butters. I don't make them myself. I buy them in. And then we shell the mold with a dark chocolate, and the inside is it's a signature ganache that I make. That's what I call it, because I stumbled upon it some years ago, and then it's become my go-to ganache recipe for. You can do it with fruit. You can make it a sort of caramel ganache, chocolate ganache. So it's like a chocolate peppermint ganache, and I add in a little bit of star anise essential oil, which is amazing with peppermint and chocolate. And then the base is I have a really popular recipe with my students. It's a Spirulina Brittle. And we take the Spirulina Brittle and we run it through white chocolate and then pipe a disc in the back. People love this bonbon.
Gorgeous. Absolutely exquisite. And this?
Yes.
Yeah.
This is a Pina Colada Pagoda, I think is what I called it. I'm actually teaching this at the end of the month. This is an awesome dessert. I remember when I made it. I haven't made it in a long time. When I made it the first time, I made it the first iteration, which I'm sure you can appreciate it. You go through different iterations of making something. So I made the first iteration, and I was like, nah. Now I know what I need to do. And then it was this. So the bottom is a toasted coconut, like it's a candied toasted coconut brittle that's put into white chocolate, and then that's how you make the little disc. So it's got a real crunch, but it's also very sweet and toasted coconutty. And then the glaze is a pineapple turmeric glaze that's on the outside. There's a white chocolate garnish on the top. And then when you cut through, I don't know if I sent you that photo or not, but when you cut through, there's a mango jam in the center, and then a fermented coconut cream around, which has a little bit of coconut rum. It's excellent, really nice.
I'll say it's excellent. These are really high-end restaurant desserts. Are any of these desserts, did you do these at SAF, or are these new?
No, these are like, SAF was 2009. I mean, I didn't know what I was doing back then, really.
Well, I think you knew what you were doing. It's just that we learn more. So I have some desserts here that are nothing like what Amy just showed you, but the idea is that always trying things. And I've been, working, I'm getting ready to teach at a spa, and that's a different kind of a dessert. I like over here right now, it's rhubarb season, which is really short, and I love rhubarb, but I don't like how sweet people make the rhubarb generally. I think it just mutes. I think a lot of desserts, particularly American desserts, are just too sweet, mutes all the flavors. So I kind of oven poached my rhubarb. I just bought plants for my terrace. Now that I don't live in New York, I have a terrace. So I've got rhubarb with some raw strawberries, because I don't like to cook strawberries most of the time. And this new pink cashew cream, but cacao nibs, because I wanted crunch. I think that layering flavors, and you saw that Amy does that tremendously, really matters. So I have something smooth, I want something crunchy. And I think with our desserts, to put a lot on a plate, I don't mean to giant plate, because I don't like those, but the elements that you described were all so beautiful. So thank you for sharing those. I'm going to grab a couple of questions here. So here's a question from Chef Char Nolan. I know many of you who are Ruby students know Chef Shar. She's a personal friend of mine. We live not very far apart, but we don't see each other very much, only in these live events lately. So let's see. Shar is asking, can you shed some light, Fran, on using chocolate chips that are 55% but sweetened with liquid stevia or erythritol? I'm tempted to try them, but use equal exchange 70% and just cut back on the amount. So Shar is a specialist in whole food plant-based, no oil. So she's looking at her desserts in a very different way. So this is what I would say to you, Shar. You're saying chocolate chips. So is there a reason that I'm asking you? And you can let me know in the box here. But I don't use chocolate chips unless I'm making a cookie and I'm looking for a heat-resistant chocolate, because I would rather use a quality chocolate and chop it up than use a chocolate chip unless I specifically need a chocolate chip. I have had the ones you're talking about. Those are Lily, I think, that are 55% sweetened with liquid stevia and erythritol. This is personal. We all have different ideas about what tastes good, that's for sure. And I'm not the food police, and I know Amy's not either, but it's not my favorite. I would rather use a higher percentage chocolate. That's a quality chocolate. I go above 70% often. I'll go to 70, 86. I've seen that, 85, and use that and cut back. So that's a question. Shar has another question here, and this is really interesting because I saw this question ahead of time, and I said, oh, it was corrected. Okay, so Shar is asking. I'm gonna tell Shar what I think, and then I'll throw it over to you, Amy. Another question for Fran: is the exchange ratio for cocoa powder and carob powder 1-to-1? No. So chocolate is a bean. The powder is defatted, to a large extent, defatted chocolate, and it is completely bitter. There's no sweetener at all. Carob, it grows on a tree. My kids have it in their yard, actually, in LA, and it's naturally sweet. They're both brown, I would say, pretty much. That is the only thing that's the same about those two. When I use carob, and I don't use it very often, but there is nothing inherently wrong with carob, except the carob confections in the marketplace tend to have a lot of junk in them. I think they do. You think so, Amy? Yeah, a lot of ingredients that we don't like. So I roast the carob powder first. I think that adds some flavor. It tends to clump around the edges, and then use it. And you're going to have to play with the level of sweetness, because carob does have some sweetness. Would you agree, Amy, or disagree, or add something?
Definitely. Yeah. I mean, I think because carob is a pod.
Yeah.
It is very sweet. I guess it's more towards a carbohydrate, given how sweet it is. Than what you were saying is accurate. With cocoa being bean, it's a more fat-based product, and the cocoa powders will always vary in fat content, so that will dictate what you use it for, etc.
Right.
I don't do baking, you see, so it doesn't apply to me in the same way. So you're better to answer this question, really.
Right. So that's what I'd say, Shar. I'd say it isn't a 1-to-1. You're going to have to adjust your level of sweetness in your case, since you aren't using fat, except maybe some nuts. That's going to be a different story. But let me know how it goes. When I switched my diet, I was a member of New York Women's Culinary. No, this is way before then. But anyway, someone was like, here's a brown cake, because I couldn't find anything in the marketplace that I thought was worth eating back then. And someone gave me a brown cake and said, oh, you're going to love it. I know you love chocolate. And it was awful. So it was carob. Now, there's nothing inherently wrong with carob, but it's not chocolate. I mean, tofu and tempeh are both from soybeans. They're different. And the carob wasn't treated very nicely. So I would say no. But if you treat carob well, you can have it. I don't think it's more healthful than a well-made chocolate product. That's my bottom line there. So now Regina has a question. One more. Can you review the process for tempering chocolate and when you need to do it? You want to take that, Amy? A short, because tempering is the whole thing.
Yeah. So again, this is going to be different for the chocolate that I make. Being homemade stone ground tends to change the tempering process versus if you're going to buy couverture. So if you're buying couverture and you're not making your own chocolate, it should say two things. It should either say on the packet the tempering curve that you should use, or you can go based on the tempering curve chart, which you can find online. So milk, white, and dark, whether it's vegan or not vegan, will all have a different curve because the percentages of cocoa vary in each one. And the butter is the thing that you're really tempering. So the tempering process is because chocolate, primarily the butter, has 6 different crystal structures. And the way that I think of it is like puzzle pieces, and that each puzzle piece is different. And if you just throw them all together, they're not going to be solid. You're not going to get a good picture. It's not going to be stable. If you try to pick it up, it's going to fall apart. If you temper the chocolate, what you're doing is you're telling all the crystals to form in a particular way that you want them to form. And that's that's to entice beta crystals. It's not fully beta crystals. It would be over crystallized if that was the case. So what we're looking for is about 1% beta crystals in the chocolate. So if you're doing 200 grams of chocolate, you want 2% beta crystals. But that happens through the tempering process naturally as long as you do it correctly. So let's say we were talking about dark chocolate. You would bring the chocolate up to 47 degrees, 47, 48 degrees. And that means that all the crystals have separated. So you're not going to get any rogue crystals in there causing problems. And those problems would be like streaky chocolate or like blue or things like that. So you take it right up to 47 degrees, and then tempering is basically motion and temperature. So you want to keep the chocolate in motion as you bring it down from 47 degrees down to about, again, depending on the curve, let's just say 28 degrees. This is all in Celsius, of course.
You're talking Celsius, right?
Yeah, just to say, yeah. I'm talking Celsius, yeah.
Yeah, just
so I don't know these temperatures in Fahrenheit, right. Yeah. So when you look at the temperature curve chart, you'll be able to see what it is in Fahrenheit. And then, so you bring it down to the bottom temperature, let's just say that, and then you'll bring it back up to, and again, this is in Celsius, it's 31.5 degrees, somewhere around there. You can bring it up to about 32. What we want to avoid is taking it then, once it's in temper, because then it's in temper at that point, you want to avoid taking it over 33 degrees because the crystals start to separate at that point. There's a really great product that you can use or you can make yourself. If you have a sous vide, you can make a product yourself called Coco Silk. And there's free videos on YouTube on how to do that. And I'm going to be doing a free live stream on how to make that. It's very easy. And then you use that to temper your chocolate. And it takes most of the issues out of chocolate, like 99% of the problems come right out of it. You don't even have to stir the chocolate as it's cooling. None of it, because it just adds beta crystals into the chocolate. If you don't want to do that, it's amazing, yeah. And it's a really simple process. If you don't want to do that, you don't want to buy a sous vide, then you can use a product called Mycryo, which is spelled M-Y-C-R-Y-O. It's made by Cacao. And that's just beta crystals. So you add 1% of that to your chocolate. So if it's 100 grams of chocolate, it's 1% Mycryo. And that will give you the beta crystals that are necessary to give you a really nice temper of your chocolate.
That's really terrific. That's a great piece of advice. It takes practice. What we teach in this course, we're talking about seed tempering chocolate and motion and watching the temperature and all that and testing it and then keeping it in temper. So when you would use it is when the coating matters. That's when you would use it. I mean, you can work around if you're not doing the kind of bonbons that Amy is talking about by adding a little bit of a very small percentage of coconut oil, for example, to your melted chocolate and dipping in a particular way, or then going ahead and covering your bonbon or your truffle or your whatever it is that you wanted tempered chocolate for. You're not going to have the same snap, though. That's for sure.
Yeah.
With some nibs or nuts or whatever. It takes practice, Regina, but it's worth learning how to do. So Christine wants to know, is cacao a good substitute for the traditional Dutch processed cocoa? Thanks for asking that question, Christina, because Amy and I have talked about this. I mean, we have talked about it together online or in conversation. I don't remember when we had this, but cacao generally refers to, or I think what you're referring to, is what's called raw chocolate. Amy and I believe that that is correctly referred to as unroasted chocolate. There's no such thing as raw chocolate. And Amy will tell you why. We agree 100% on this. And I've called companies, chocolate companies, you can pick up the phone and call somebody when you have a question or a comment or disagree about something, or want them to know something. Chocolate companies that say raw chocolate. Well, there is no raw chocolate, but the beans can be unroasted. So I look at your question and I say, you're talking about unroasted chocolate, which is non-alkalized, and Dutch process, which is alkalized, and they're different. And we have an assignment in the course for making hot chocolate. I know a lot of people, from when they send in their assignment, and they go like, oh, I thought this was going to be really boring. It was really interesting because the cocos taste different, they behave differently, and that's for sure. They are different. When you're doing a batter-based dessert, you're going to have a problem if you substitute one for the other, if you substitute one that the recipe didn't call for with the leavening agent. So Amy is doing desserts that aren't baked. I'm assuming that you're using different kinds of cacao. Would you like to add to this conversation, this question?
Well, I mean, you know more about this than me, again, because like you said, if I'm using it in raw form, as in unroasted, then and not baking stuff in the oven, it's a very different situation. But I can also say that raw chocolate powder, let's just pretend that's what it is for a moment. So unroasted cocoa powder is really light and fluffy and clumpy in comparison to roasted chocolate powder, which is very like velvety and soft and dissolves a lot easier than the unroasted. And again, so we can refer to it as unroasted because during the fermentation process, it heats to over 55 degrees, which is over the raw temperatures. That's why it's not actually raw. So the only thing that's being omitted, and that is is the roasting process, because of whatever that's meant to preserve in terms of nutrients and minerals and things of that nature, which is also up for debate as to whether that's even the case.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for saying that. Thank you for, we really want to be transparent about things. People say to me, I eat chocolate every day. I imagine Amy does as well. And I think it's great. I feel fine. It makes me happy too. But, people send me cutesy little emails or messages that say, chocolate is a bean, therefore it's a salad. No, we want a varied diet. Desserts should be luxurious, depending on what it is for you. So Roseanne wants to know, can you make a ganache without whipping cream? What can you use instead? Well, most definitely you can make a ganache without whipping cream. I use plant milk. A variety of plant milks. My favorite right now is oat milk because for me, it means that people who are soy avoiders, which I'm not, nut allergic, which I'm not, can have a lovely ganache. I might enrich the ganache. I make a simple one for some people. I might enrich it with more fat. I infuse the flavors. I also do water ganache. I've got a ganache using citrus and tahini. And I know Amy specializes in making ganaches. So the whipping cream is it'll give you something, but vegan whipping creams have a lot of ingredients in there that I'm not fond of, that's for sure. What about you, Amy?
I feel exactly the same, and I'm glad that you do too.
Yeah. So, ganache is just not a problem using
it's not
plant-based ingredients, but you have to take care when you're making ganache. Chop your chocolate finely and get the liquid to a certain temperature and all that stuff really matters. And I always do a test because I want to see what I'll take a spoonful, put it in the fridge to see what the final consistency is going to be. Yeah. So Kate wants to know, Amy, what are your recommendations for making a good vegan chocolate bar at home that has the desired snap?
We can talk about the snap, but that's the tempering process.
Right.
The texture is going to be the main thing of making it at home. So tomorrow I'm teaching a live stream on how to make chocolate at home, and that's the way that I learned how to make it in the very first place at the Raw Chocolate Company many, many years ago. And that's using a high-speed blender. So for people who are making stuff at home and they don't want to spend money on like a grinder, or that feels kind of out of reach to them at the moment, they're actually not that expensive. Then the snap really comes down to the tempering process. So if you're wanting to make your own chocolate, then I would highly recommend getting a stone grinder. Over in the States, I think it's called Santha. Over here, it's called the Spectra. It's the same machine, I believe. And it's a fantastic machine for making chocolate. But if you're talking about taking chocolate and like couverture and melting it down and using it to make bars, then you want to be focusing on the tempering process.
Mm-hmm. You know, I took a class one day. It was really fun with a bunch of chocolate professionals. Maricel Presilla, who wrote the book about the history of chocolate, did this. It was supposed to be a 2-hour thing. We ended up spending 6 hours because we were all so interesting. But I forgot. Oh, this is terrible. I can't remember the name of the chef. It's Hawaiian chocolate company. And he was showing, we actually made chocolate in food processor that day. So you can do it in a high-speed blender. I think anybody who really wants to do fine vegan desserts really should invest in a high-speed blender at least. And if you're interested, then definitely Amy's class has your name all over it. So let's see. Tara Lynn, hi Terry Lynn, says, Amy, your food is beautiful, amazing flavor and texture. She's great. Can you talk about your routine for developing recipes and designing desserts?
I mean, I can very briefly touch on it because it's an incredibly in-depth process, as I'm sure Fran can attest to. But what would be better is I have a free live stream on my website where we actually went into creating new recipes and flavor pairing. And it was an 1.5-hour in-depth kind of structured class. So that's on my website, which I can send Fran a direct link for after class so that she can, or after this, so she can give it to you. It's kind of like where to start. I guess I would start with where it actually begins, which is the kind of inspiration for the dessert. So where you take inspiration from, I think is the starting point for developing a recipe. Now, the other thing is that I, having been working in this field and developing, as we were talking about earlier, there was nothing 10, 15 years ago in this field, and it's been developed over the last 15 years by people like me in terms of the raw desserts that I do. And so it was really spearheading a whole, how do you make a tart base? How do you make a donut? How do you make a, and everybody has their way, but what's your way that makes it completely different than these other people's way? Because that's always been my thing. It's like, I want it to be as similar to the cooked version as possible. So I've always strived for that. So I have a library for myself of base recipes, and I'll typically go, okay, I'm going to make a donut. So I really like this dough, but I want to switch it up a little bit. So I'm going to try this thing and then see if it works. If it does work, hallelujah, praise Jesus. And if it doesn't, go back to the drawing board, start again. And then from that, I go, okay, that worked really cool. Now I'm going to take this praline glaze because I think that's going to work really well. And then it needs some kind of crispiness on the outside for sure. So I'm going to do a tempered chocolate shell on the outside. So that's kind of how I can pick and choose from my library and just go, I like this element, I want this element. And it's really easy for me now. But, the inspiration is also where it starts from, is like, what inspires you? Where do you find inspiration when you're feeling like you have nothing, but you want to do something in the kitchen, like you have no inspiration, but you really want to get in the kitchen and do something? Like, where do you get inspiration from? That's all stuff that we talk about in my live stream, if that's something that you want to check out.
Yeah, that's great advice. I mean, for me, I get my, sometimes I'll just go to the farmer's market and see some fruit And that'll be enough for me to start thinking about, I want to do this, but I've done that. So how am I going to use it a little bit differently? What am I in the mood for? I always want to have different elements, you know, some soft, some crunch, some cream, sometimes more simple, sometimes just super direct. And it is not my nature really to be a precise note taker. I've had to train myself to do that. So I have very much like Amy, you know, I have these are the my base recipes that I go back to all the time. And then if I have some free time, and then I'll say to myself, locked and loaded, don't touch these. Sometimes I can't help it, or a client will say, well, can you do that with date sugar or maple sugar instead of this, instead of that? And then it gets, you know, it gets interesting. It gets interesting, but think about where you get your inspiration. Look at shops, look at magazines, restaurant menus, the markets. Seasonal is important to me. I mean, sometimes when we're developing recipes, it's a little skewed for the professionals because we might be writing something in the summer where we need a winter-y thing. I try to avoid that as much as possible, really. And then pay attention, and if something, Amy put it, if something works, you go, hallelujah. If it almost works, then I have to think about what to change and try to just change one thing at a time. Sometimes you just know, sometimes you don't. For me, I don't like food waste. I cannot stand food waste. But very occasionally I've had to just say, this isn't going to work. This isn't going to work at all. Next. And so that's so, you know, I mean, that's the way you do it. So I will cut, you know, I'll take my idea, write it down, sometimes sketch. I'm not an artist, but sketch, and then cut what I think is the recipe in half or even by a quarter and try it that way to try to avoid waste. And think about flavor profiles. In Essential Vegan Desserts, there are charts with flavor pairings and profiles. I think the Vegetarian Flavor Bible is a great resource to have too. Hi, Laura. It's good to see you. Oh, this is a good question. So vegan white chocolate. You know, I was going to ask you about that, Amy, because some of my pastry people that I talk to over on your side of the pond talk a lot more about vegan white chocolate than we have available here in terms of quality. Now, you're making your own. I'm clear that you're making your own, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So cacao butter as a base. I mean, here the conventional white chocolate, unless it's very high quality, it's junk. I mean, it's vegetable oil. It's awful. But I think over in the UK, there are more brands of vegan white chocolate, or that's what I'm being told.
Would you say I think it's better over here than in the States. I've seen some in the States, but I think in Europe it's a bigger thing.
Yeah, yeah. So thanks for that, Laura. Let's see. Maria wants to know, Amy, do I need a panning machine to make nuts enrobed in dark chocolate? What's a substitute for shellac to make dragées shiny? We have a pastry. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, you have to have a panning machine. I mean, you can get the KitchenAid. If you have the KitchenAid stand mixer, the specific one, you can get, it has a panning attachment. So I think, and the pan is like, I don't know, yay. So I think it's like a 3 kilo capacity or something. So if you just wanted to mess around with it. But yeah, it's like that. And then alternative to shellac, I don't think that there is one. When I worked at the Raw Chocolate Company, just after I left, he started doing some panning. And he decided that instead of going for the shellac, which he was never going to do, he decided to go for putting just cocoa powder in the machine afterwards and just doing a cocoa powder finish on it. So it's really going to be down to, we were talking about in the flavor pairing class actually, was working within the limitations of the ingredients that you want to use, because the ingredients that we want to use all have their own natural limitations. So if you're not wanting to use shellac, then and you still want something to be shiny, you're going to tear your hair out trying to figure that out, because I don't think that there's a natural way of doing that.
Praise
So
Amy for saying that.
you're going to need to compromise when you want to be making things that are natural.
I agree with Amy 100%. I mean, we can do so much, and we've learned that we can do so much more as we keep studying and doing. But there are some things that there are pastry chefs doing exquisite French pastries, for example. One of my former students, her croissant won L'Artisan Bakery, Carolina Malia in Florida, won best croissant in Miami in a blind tasting. And her work is exquisite. And I applaud it. And I love her croissant. I mean, that's a treat for me, and her bonbons. But some of the pastry chefs doing different kind of work from what I'm doing or what Amy's doing are using ingredients that I don't care to use. You know, I'm trying to keep things as natural as possible. And I know that that's very important to Amy as well. So it's a choice, you know, but there's no right or wrong. It's your choice. For me, I want as natural as possible and still make dessert. And there are ways to do it. There are ways to do it. Regina wants to know if you wanted to write with chocolate on a cake, would you just use melted chocolate or a ganache? Well, I'd rather use melted chocolate. I have used ganache, a very heavy ganache. It depends. It depends. What do you say, Amy?
It's not something that I do. However, the first thing that comes to mind is that if you're going to pipe tempered chocolate onto a cake that's moist, it's going to separate from the cake because of the moisture is going to, tempered chocolate's going to separate from it. So in that case, if we were going onto a cake, I would do something that was maybe I would use an icing or a ganache, like you said, something like that. I would actually lean towards an icing because I'm more comfortable with that.
Right.
But if I was piping on a chocolate bar, I would use tempered chocolate for sure. I just wanted to finish up on the. I just want to say one more thing on the panning thing in terms of finishing. So when you're finishing the chocolate, if you're, you know, in order to think outside of the box of like, I can't use shellac, but I still want it to look really cool. You could be looking at getting white vegan chocolate and coloring it and putting that on as a final layer. So it's not going to be shiny, but it's going to have a really beautiful color to it. So it's when it comes to these things, it's about thinking outside of the box and thinking, what can I do? Rather than, well, oh, I can't do that. Focusing on the things you can't do, but thinking about how you can. What can I do to make this really cool by using natural ingredients? It's a great challenge for your mind and as a chef.
It's a wonderful piece of advice too. Instead of, you know, it's like when I changed my diet, I didn't focus on what I couldn't eat. I focused on all these new foods, new to me, because actually I was eating a much more limited diet than I found in the plant world. And what can I do? So that's a great piece of advice. So Ozzy, hi, Ozzy has a comment, not a question, but Amy, you're killing me with the photos. We should have a taste package for this live event. You're a true inspiration. That's for sure.
Thanks very much.
That's for sure. Omar has a question. Any tips on creating chocolate protein bars that keep for a while, maybe a month? Well, you know, that's a very broad question because it depends on the ingredients that you're going to use. But if I'm making a bar, and I don't use protein powder, but I use things like nuts and seeds and maybe some maca and lucuma and things that are going to give us some nutrition. I keep them in the freezer. Jill says, is Montezuma's Absolute Black Dark Chocolate healthy and good to use? Jill, I don't know what Montezuma's Absolute Black Dark Chocolate is.
Montezuma is a British brand. It's really funny because they've gotten really big. They're a British brand, and they now do I don't know if it's 8 bars or 5 bars of 100% chocolate. My mom likes it. You can get it. So what was the question for baking? Is that what the question?
No, she's just saying, is it healthy and good to use? Is it healthy?
I mean, I think healthy is like it's one of these words that you have to decide for yourself if it's healthy. If it has white sugar, I think automatically it's not. I think that if there's added ingredients other than cocoa of any form and a sweetener that you feel good about, and even soy lecithin isn't necessary in chocolate, I wouldn't be buying anything outside of that. Montezuma's is a great brand. So I think I'd give you the old 2 thumbs up on that.
2 thumbs up. Okay, so I'm on this side of the pond, and so I didn't know this Montezuma's, but I have seen more and more 100% chocolate, pure chocolate, unsweetened chocolate, which I'm guessing this is. I was just sent a variety of cocoa powders from Dazan, and they're different colors. There's one that's reddish. They're all, and some natural, non-alkalized, for example, that are different colors. And there's a pure black, which is just a highly, highly alkalized cocoa. And I think when I'm using that, I use just a drop for color because it doesn't taste good. What you want to look at is the fat content, because that matters more to some people than to others. But these cocoa powders and chocolates, look at the other ingredients. We all have different idea of what tastes good. I know this from teaching. Group A would say that chocolate was delicious, but it was too dark. Group B would say that was delicious, the same chocolate, but it was too sweet. So it has to be what works for you. I know Shar has found some 100% chocolate, the black chocolate, if you want to call it that she likes very, very much. We've got another question from Terry Lynn. Amy, any tips for mastering gluten-free and vegan desserts? Well, that's what Amy is doing, is gluten-free. Your desserts happen to be gluten-free, right?
Yeah,
by nature. She's not baking.
Gluten-free. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
So sorry, what was the question? Any tips on
any tips? You got to develop recipes. I do it.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Not really, because again, it's the difference between what Fran does and what I do. So because I don't use the oven, the impact of what I'm using is very different than what Fran does. Because when you bake something, it completely changes the scientific structure of it. So, for example, the difference between wheat flour and oat flour. So if Fran's making a pastry case and she has to take it from wheat flour to oat flour, she's going to need to really think about that and how that changes. For me, all of my desserts are wheat-free, gluten-free, dairy-free, refined sugar-free. So it's not really a consideration in my work. I just wouldn't use those products.
Right. Amy said something super important that I try to emphasize in all of my classes, in all of my interviews and everywhere, is that you've got to do gluten-free baking is a whole different thing. There are a lot of recipes that are naturally gluten-free. What Amy's doing, if I'm making a ganache or a truffle, it's gluten-free. Poached pear is gluten-free. Once you start replacing flours, I see a lot of recipes that say 1 cup of whole wheat pastry flour, 1 cup of AP flour, or 2 cups of gluten-free flour mix. No, no.
Yeah.
There's a lot more to it. And within the gluten-free flours, oat flour, which I love, rice flour, sorghum, coconut flour, they have all different thirsty levels. Everything matters. So you've got to test, cut your recipe down, and see what you can do. Omar missed the sous vide process for chocolate. Omar, you can go back. You can watch this. Everybody here can watch this live stream, and you'll be able to find what Amy said. So Marty says, any ideas how I can keep my chocolate chips from melting in the cookie when I'm selling them at a hot farmer's market? Well, Marty, chocolate and heat, chocolate melts in the heat. So, you want to, that's if I'm doing fine chocolate work or assembling a really, a cake with a lot of components that can melt, I have my air conditioning on really high. I can tell you that. So if you're selling chocolate chip cookies at a farmer's market and it's really hot, maybe bring your cookies frozen. There's a limit to what you can do. And I think part of learning to do desserts, whether they're vegan, conventional, raw, is to understand what's going to happen to them. I was at a wedding in the South and I was watching, and felt like it was 100-something degrees. And I saw this pastry chef outside trying to assemble the wedding cake, and it was the icing was just falling off. Or back in the day, I would get, yeah, right. I'm like, what doesn't she understand about the heat? Why is she doing that? Or people would say to me, well, I made so-and-so's gluten-free icing and it melted at room temperature. Well, I said, well, you go to so-and-so and you ask them. But the point is, if you understand about coconut oil, solid at a certain temperature, it's going to melt at another temperature. I think that we can end this conversation by saying, get to know your ingredients, practice, study, have fun, have fun. You're not going to want to do this if it isn't enjoyable. I mean, I'm just thrilled to be able to offer desserts to people, all kinds of eaters. I mean, everybody seems to want it. And Amy, I can't thank you enough for being here today. This was a wonderful conversation. It's nice to see you. Someday I'm going to want to meet you in person.
Can I just add to the answer for him with the chocolate chip cookies?
Yeah.
So what I saw somebody in a group recently say a very similar question, because of summer is approaching in most of the countries that we're in. And they said that what they do is they do like a shellac over one of the cookies, like whatever they need to do to preserve it. And they have that as a show cookie. And then you can have your other cookies in like a cooler. So if people want it, you go, yeah, cool. And you take it out and you give it to them. And then if it melts on their time.
Melts in your hands. That's a great idea.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's a good idea, these show cookies. So thank you for adding that. Well, I want to thank everybody for being here today. Big round of applause that we won't be able to hear for Chef Amy. Grab the recipe, grab the link to Amy's website, and have a great rest of the day. Amy, have a good night, because it's probably around 8 o'clock for you, right?
Over there. Yes. And I just wanted to thank you for having me on, and thank you everybody for joining and for your questions. And I appreciate the opportunity. If you want to follow up with me with anything, feel free to email me, and I'll send you over a link to the Coco Silk for people that want to do that, and I'll send you over a link to the flavor pairings if they want to check that out.
Thanks a million. Thank you, everyone. I'll see you in June. The date is already up on the live event website. I'm going to be doing a talk on how to teach a cooking class. So I will see you then. Take care, everyone. Have a great rest of the day or evening. Bye.